Volume 2 Chapter 20. Ooh. The voices carried high and next turned to watch the arc of the stone sail overhead and far beyond the distance lines. The one who threw the stone behind her turned and held a hand up to her eyes pretending to block out the sun to see better. She let out a long whistle, and then flexed her bicep and wore a toothy smile. It was all the more impressive because it was only a little elf girl who did it. As expected of a servant of Lord Ines, Henry said with absolute sincerity. Nah, it was easy, that's why, much as we like games, my brother and I shouldn't do these. We can't not win, we're fine with the food and music, Aura said with a grin. A strapping young man took up a similar-sized stone, took position, and with a roaring grunt he heaved it back overhead. It landed 20 paces away, and he flushed red when Aura winked at him. With a sheepish grin in return, he rubbed the back of his head and said, I kinda agree with the little lady here. Henry crouched down and put a hand on the shoulders of Aura and Mera alike. The two had become familiar with her and her near worshipfulness of their master, and so they allowed her touch, particularly since she was constantly thinking of their well-being and happiness when they were about. I just want you two to have fun too. If you're okay with music and food, that's fine, just know that nobody will complain if you want to play. Our home is yours as long as you're with us. It is the least we can do. SC sister, I told you, Mir said with a little blush to his cheek. Yeah. Look, it's nice and all, but it's better if we don't. Besides, we can enjoy watching, Aura said, a blue eye on her brother who she was sure would admonish her if she was rude about her refusal. It was enough for Henry to give in at least, and she stood up and called the village to order. Teams were selected and the Team Caber toss began. The heavy thunk of stripped tree trunks flying overhead to flip into the field was punctuated by cries of judges calling out points and shouts of enthusiasm. Young men, eager to impress young women, sought to display their skills in archery contests. Various games were all over the empty field beyond the village, and at every one, the prize was beer. Music and dancing and music, but through all that, the leaders of Carney remained sober and supervising. Fights between the runners and the native Carnians were broken up by a recruit, Peter, Henry or Fur before they could become serious, and turned into contests of arm wrestling or drinking, or the combatants put as a team against another pair to wrestle in displays of stubborn strength. Fur would more than once covertly dose a runner's drink with a stamina potion to give them the endurance to win and so earn respect for their number. Thus, the day wore on. The smell of sweat and beer was everywhere, competing with the smell of abundant meat harvested from deep within the woods with a little help from Aura's beasts, who sniffed at or killed greater game. Two houses were set against one another, then those were paired to be set against two others, and little by little, barriers began to come down. Henry crinkled her nose a little when she smelled sex and heard moans from a bush she passed by on the fringes of the fields. When she came to Lucrute, he wore a boyish and bemused grin. Somewhat mocking and flirtatious seemed to be his default state even when it wasn't intended. Looks like it's all coming together, isn't it? Though I wouldn't want to drink from the river today, he chuckled, and Henry stared at him with a cockeyed look of confusion. Oh, I was just down there to take a leak, didn't go. There were several different couples coming and going from various lightly concealed areas, and I heard a lot of splashing and moaning, he chortled when Henry began to blush. That's a really good idea. I'll bring that up with Nfur later. How did I not think of that? Henry remonstrated herself, but forced a neutral expression to acknowledge the blonde archer's lecherous point. Yes, it is, a few fights to break up, but nothing serious and the runners are starting to blend in well. Speaking of, have you made your peace with Britta yet? Lucrute had the grace to look somewhat ashamed of himself. No, I haven't, not really. I was the deciding vote on not letting her into the Swords of Darkness back when we were all copper plates, and that's a sore point for her still. I see, Henry said without the hint of criticism she felt Lucrute deserved. Yeah, you don't have to say anything, I should go clear the air with her, things are going to get real bad real soon and all. Do you know where she is? Lucrute asked and, unwilling to meet the pretty eyes boring into him, looked off toward the crowd. Give her a little while. Last I saw she was leading a runner off to one of the newly built homes. I wouldn't interrupt, and maybe you should bring her a beer too, she'll probably be thirsty. Henry gave him a bawdy look, and it was Lucrute's turn to blush. Right, I'll do that. Maybe give it an hour, she's passionate. Lucrute bit his lower lip and gave a jealous look back towards the walls of the village. Oh, were you two? Henry asked, and he nodded. Just once or twice. It was before I joined the Swords of Darkness. We had fun, that's all it was supposed to be. No, never mind, this isn't the sort of thing you need to worry about. I'll go apologize to her later, wish me luck, Lucroot said and shuffled on. When morning came, and hangovers came with it, it was all but the end of having two villages in one set of walls. Heinz exited his room just in time to find Lupus Regina extending a hand to knock. How do I look, Moman? Lupus Regina asked, twirling around in a quick pirouette. Her gown was of a vibrant blue, and true to her seemingly preferred style, was slit at one thigh to show off her leg. It rose up in a form-fitting fashion to push up her ample breasts, which were in turn concealed by white ruffles, but leaving the shoulders exposed while her sleeves were long and ended in white gloves. Lovely, he said, and meant it. For a moment, he almost asked how he looked, but instead he refrained. Though at least he understood why after a moment. I'm still thinking of that old ruin of a body I used to have, this one. I actually look good. Still, he didn't ask. Shall we? Lupu? Heinz asked and extended the crook of his arm. Of course, Moman. She gave him a winning smile and savored a thrill of the sort any maid of Nazarick would have given her life to experience. I'm only a maid, this is only a cover, but this is still perhaps the happiest day of my life. Lupu thought to herself as they descended the stairs, and every eye turned to Team Axel that, for all appearances, might be born nobles. A long table was laid out for the occasion, and at its head was an empty space for only one. Nearest its left hand at the corner end was Kazif Stranov, at its right, the king's son, Prince Sanak, followed by his daughter, Princess Rena, beside her brother. Behind her stood her bodyguard, but to her own right hand sat the Marquis Revan. The space to the left of Kazif, Heinz saw, was occupied by Pandora's actor in his guise as Heinz's gown, and, to the left of that, two empty spots, and it was immediately obvious to Heinz whom those spaces were for. Proximity at the table was the measure of the position within the court. Just like in normal work meetings, we wait for the boss to arrive. Heinz recalled from his old world. When Heinz and Lupu took their places, servants began to wheel out carts filled with silver trays or bottles of wine, and it was while they did this that a herald called out, "All rise for King Ramposa III." Heinz and Lupus Regina stood like all the rest, and, with slow and stately steps, the king entered and walked to his place at the table. When he reached it, the servants began to pour wine, starting from the end and working their way to the front while the king spoke. The king is the face and the beating heart of the kingdom. But the people, they are his blood, they are his fingers and hands, they are the feet that march to war and the living embodiment of his rule. As king, I have always sought to protect my people as best I could. Yet sometimes, even the greatest king needs help. King Ramposa waved a hand toward Axel and Pandora's actor. These three embodied what it means to do just that. Heinz Ulgaun crushed traders that threatened not only my peasants, but our royal head warrior. Moman and Lupu took it upon themselves to protect a village from not one, but two skeletal dragons, and went on to destroy Azur and an enclave in Nirantal, thus saving the city from turning into a land of the undead. They have, even if they didn't know it, embodied the true will and desire of my rule, and for that, King Ramposa said just as a servant poured wine into his silver cup, and raised it, I thank you, each of you. Hail to the heroes! Hail to the heroes! The court said, having raised their glasses after the king, and as one, they drank. Now, you may be seated. Eat, drink, and be merry. That too is the will of your king, Ramposa said with a charming sly smile before he seated himself. Two skeletal dragons, truly impressive, Sir Moman. Pandora's actor stated with the utmost courtesy. From what I hear, you bested a whole scripture of the theocracy. If we're picking things to be impressed by, Master Gown, I think that is the more impressive. Heinz responded with similar courtesy. They're merely men, and men can die, that's always their greatest fear, but you bested men who love death so much they risked their lives to spread it. No mean feat. Pandora's actor retorted. I won't say it's nothing, but men with no fear at all, as is said of the scriptures, is nothing to belittle either. Heinz answered and sipped from his cup. Business rules, don't outdrink the boss, drink just enough to be sociable, don't make a fool of yourself. Learn what you can. Rena stared at the two with the utmost fascination as the bond seemed to form right away. Could they be brothers? Or related in some way? She wondered. It was little things. They used words the same way, they both cut their meat the same way, and they seemed to be on exceptionally good terms despite the fact that outside of a team dynamic, magic casters and warriors almost never got along. She kept her suspicions to herself, and simply observed, filing away details later to possibly bring up to Lord Demiurge. Could Moman be a subordinate? She wondered. Her father, though he was no fool, detected nothing amiss, nor did her brother, or anyone else. Questions beget questions like whores do bastards. She quietly cursed and wished just for once to be able to enjoy something like everyone else did without questioning it. The table grew steadily drunker as the evening went on, and servants began to help the people away from their tables to sleep it off in various guest quarters. The sound of dragging feet and the occasional toppling of a body that had just a little too much and crashed to the floor or face first into the table, punctuated the sound of the remaining conversation. It was not lost on Renna, however, that neither Master Gown nor Sir Moman engaged much in the way of drinking. Though Lupa seemed to enjoy herself, she frequently cast Cure Poison and went back to it again. "It's good to be a cleric," she said with a laugh that quickly spread to those near enough to hear it. Even the king himself was only moderate in his consumption. Finally it happened that only the king's immediate circle remained both conscious and present, along with their 3 guests, and the king rose to his feet. "Moman, Lupu, Master Gown, walk with me," he said, and for a moment it appeared that Gazif and the rest were going to rise as well. Their hands on the table, they were pushing themselves to their feet to join him. "No, I wish to speak with the 3 heroes alone," the king said with haste, and he left them behind. It was pitch dark out when he led them quietly out to the back of the palace where the gardens lay. Despite the night's darkness, seeing wasn't difficult. Various green twinkling lights were going constantly along the path. "Glowbugs," Ramposa said, "rare creatures in most seasons, but at this time of year, they come out in numbers and flock to blue roses, so my garden path is lined with their favorite perches. It also grants me a degree of privacy I don't get very often." "I see, fascinating," Pandora's actor said. "Very pretty," Ines added. "Yes, it's nice." Lupus Regina completed the round of praise, and the king let out a bark of laughter. The path crunched under heel as he led them down the garden path. Like most things in this kingdom, it isn't what it seems. The glowbugs kill most of the flowering buds they alight on, so we have to regularly call out casters to heal the plants. There's a metaphor there, and I'm sure my daughter could see it if I brought her with me. "But this is my task," he said, and led them beneath a high trellis that was covered in roses and glowed with twinkling lights that lit up the small path, revealing it to be of broken-up black pearl that reflected the light like countless tiny mirrors. "Sir Moman, you were rightly promised a reward, and you will receive it no matter your answer. My request of you is simple, and this is a job with abundant compensation to be had. I want you and Lupu, Team Axel, to take down 8 fingers. Hunt down their leadership, made up of adamantite or nearly adamantite killers. I will give you all the information we have. They are the rot of this kingdom, like a disease or a cancer, or perhaps like termites in unprotected wood. They've eaten their way into the structure of the kingdom. They threaten to bring it down with their many nibbles. This may not be easy, and it may pose a great risk, but if you succeed with the big fish, my personal guard and the royal faction can take down the rest." "That is a significant request, King Ramposa," Ines said, pretending to be surprised and glancing down at his partner. Lupu clung to his arm and looked up at him. She winked and gave a tiny nod. "What are you offering?" Ines asked. "Lordship, of any lands you choose that I have available to give to you," Ramposa replied. "If everything goes well, then even land equivalent to one of the 10 great lords is a possibility. That is acceptable compensation. The village I fought in, I built a relationship with the people there. If it is acceptable to you, then I would like suitable land around that region," Moman asked, and to that the king was quick to concede. "It will be yours when the job is done. We can talk about how far out that land should go. After the job is done, I trust you will accept my word that I will be generous," Ramposa replied, his piercing eyes, not at all fitting the aged body that carried them, were held firmly up to the face of the adamantite adventurer. "I do," Ines replied. "I accept your terms. All that you have asked will be done. I will begin tomorrow." Ramposa then looked to Master Gown. "Magic casters are a prickly lot as a rule, and what I'm asking of you is even greater than what I am asking of Sir Moman and his partner. Will you also do as I have asked, and what will you ask in return if you accept? Pandora's actor took his cue from his master and from the plan of his master that he'd been informed of by Demiurge. I understand the desire to have a strong magic caster in your service, but I am far older than I seem, and I dislike serving. I emerged from my studies only to help people I found in sudden distress by chance. Being sucked into court games for someone else has no appeal to me. Ramposa felt his heart was about to drop into his guts. Pandora's actor put a hand on the king's shoulder and added in a sonorous, noble voice, "Therefore, if I do this for you, restoring the peace I value so highly, would only be worthwhile if I were an independent ruler. Give me the land of the Katza Plains south of Erantal, and extending to the western border of the Draconic Kingdom. When the Baharuth Empire capitulates, I will also take land from them in exchange for peace. I will be a buffer state between you and they will not threaten you again. Give me an alliance between the kingdom I will have founded, and yourself, and never again will a harvest be interrupted by a war in the north. Peace within, and peace without, for not even 120 miles of land across? I call that a bargain." King Ramposa replied, but as he stuck out his hand he asked, "Are you sure you can do this?" Pandora's actor reached out to the king and clasped forearm to forearm. "I can," he said, in a voice that closed all doubt, like a coffin lid closed in the dead. And King Ramposa III's heart began to lighten. Volume 2 Chapter 21. "So that is the situation," Ainz said, looking down at Lake Hughes. "The king of Reastais has hired me to bring down 8 fingers. His intelligence tells me about a subgroup within their leadership comprised of some particularly dangerous people referred to as 6 arms. More importantly, the organization is simply too large for just 2 to bring down. As expected of Momen, bringing down a team of mighty killers is a trivial afterthought." Evil Eye looked through moony red eyes hidden by her white mask. "So, will you help me?" Ainz asked, opening his onyx-armored hands and resting them on the table. "Sir Momen," Lake Hughes spoke calmly, evenly, and in a business-like manner, "your reputation for your care for the weak has spread quite widely, and it is a sentiment that I myself share." She lightly touched the red shirt she wore, resting a hand on her breast. It was a friendly indication of how heartfelt she intended to be, but her tone was calm and not at all enthusiastic. "But first and foremost, we are adventurers, and if I start putting my team at risk for free, very soon everybody with a sob story will expect it. Ultimately that will only hurt my profession and get more people killed for not being able to afford good equipment. I can cut our pay for a single mission, but I can't and I won't do this for nothing. Tilja Momen, Tunibyo is stingy." Lupu smirked knowingly and put her feet up on the table, and dared the beet red Lake Hughes to argue. "Evil boss," Tia and Tina said at once in a deadpan voice that only made Lake Hughes turn more purple. Ainz put a hand on Lupus Regina's wrist. "She's not wrong. Adventurers can't eat fame or repair their armor with legends or buy weapons with exposure. If we want the skills of the talented, we should provide suitable compensation." Lake Hughes began to visibly relax, and her sisters with her. "I never said I wanted your help for free, Lady Lake Hughes. Only that I wanted it," Ainz said with a little wink, to which Lake Hughes raised a finger, opened her mouth, thought about it, and then closed her mouth and lowered her finger back down to lay with her hand flat on the table. "All right, that's true. I apologize for the misunderstanding," Lake Hughes said, darting her bright blue eyes up at the giant Gagran and down at the diminutive Evil Eye when they chortled at her expense. "What are you offering, Sir Momen?" "I'm being offered a lordship. I will give you 15% of the net revenue from taxes at the end of my first year," Ainz promised. "What do you say?" Every member of Blue Rose spun their head toward Lake Hughes. However, the hard-nosed adventurer did not immediately give in. "On top of paying for the replacement of any disposable items we use." "Naturally." Ainz inclined his head toward his counterpart. "Fine, we have a bargain," Lake Hughes said and put out her hand. Ainz clasped her forearm. She was warm to the touch even through his gloves, and from her the barest tease of an expensive perfume enticed his senses. The light scent of lavender, and at a glance closer, his sharp senses detected the use of makeup. So she has a bit of vanity. Or is this just to give her an advantage in negotiations? He didn't know, though he suspected a little of both. Lake Hughes and Momen both reseated themselves when their agreement was made, and with the job at hand, the teams were united in their focus, Even Lupus Regina put her feet back on the floor and sat up straight, the disinterested look gone from her face. "So, what do you need us to do?" Lake Hughes asked. "You do have a plan, yes?" "I do," Ein stated. "I need you to launch a series of burning campaigns on farms where the plants that make black dust are grown. Hit them and hit them hard for the next 2 weeks. Then, wait," he said and closed his hands together. "Just wait?" Lake Hughes looked back and forth to her team. They didn't scratch their heads, but their confusion was evident. "Wait," Moman answered. "I will take care of the follow-up, and then our allies will be used in mop-up operations." "That isn't much of a plan," Gagran said gingerly. "This isn't much of a problem." Lupu grinned up at her mountainous counterpart. "Not to worry, we got this, don't you worry your adorable virgin head about it." The adamantite-ranked red-haired cleric winked playfully up at the blonde square-headed giant who blushed for the first time since the rest of them had known her. "You're a virgin," they shouted as one over her arm waving protests and Lupu's outrageous laughter, and not much business was discussed after that. Barbaro breathed in the scent of smoke, waving over from a burning village that belonged to a noble who was not part of the royal faction, and that same noble also had no connection to Eight Fingers and so had no value to the prince. Allowing his soldiers a little plunder was extra honey on the cake. It allowed him to keep their loyalty to him up. Bought loyalty is the easiest kind. He drew himself up with a smug expression. As an excuse, he wrote a short letter home announcing that he'd caught some of the traitors that had killed a lord's son, and that the village had attempted to hide them. "Is my tent ready?" he asked one of his officers. "Yes, sir, and so is Lake Hughes," the officer said with a passive voice and blank eyes. "Good," Barbaro muttered and went into his tent. The slender blonde was a little bit better fed, but she shrank from him, no more grateful than before. He stared down at her while she groveled like a dog with her belly up and fingers folded into her palms like a dog's paws. She looked up at him with eyes full of fear. "Beg for your supper, Lake Hughes," he said with a smirk. She was dressed in a close approximation of the adventurer's expensive clothing, though much, much cheaper. Mere red wool clothing with the cheapest red and gold dyes, a caricature. "Please let me eat. Please let me eat, sir." Ty whimpered and held still when his foot went down to her throat. Very little pressure came down, but very little needed to. "Then hadn't you better apologize?" Barbaro asked rhetorically. "I'm sorry I was rude. I'm sorry I was disrespectful. I'm sorry I was bad to you." Tyr screamed her sorries until she felt her breath cut off and became a gurgle. His foot slowly eased up again. Her bulging eyes stared at him. "Forgive me," she begged as he called her Lake Hughes and spat down into her face. The noise of his grunts were accompanied by the roaring fires of the ruined village and the crashing noise of broken homes tumbling inward onto their foundations. When Prince Barbaro finally released his bruising hold on his plaything, he was happy and sated, though breath came labored enough that he immediately thought, "I should get more exercise. I don't want to end up like my idiot younger brother." It led him to another thought. Erasing this place completely might take another day or two, but yes, worth it. An object lesson to the absentee lord and an object lesson to the peasants he sends to reoccupy the place. Murder a noble, and everything you ever were, will cease to exist. Time well spent. He mused with satisfaction. Such a destructive act would intimidate the more weak-willed, and increase the likelihood of ascending the throne. Time well spent indeed. He praised himself one more time, and looked at the curled-up little ball of pale flesh that was trying to look anywhere but in his direction, until he stepped into her view, and she couldn't avoid it again. Henry was more than a little pleased, and with good reason. The newly arrived ogres and lamias were followed by a small tribe of goblins that encountered Juggum and his warriors hunting in the woods. Suspicious at first, this faded when the various groups began to work together over the course of several days. Ogres proved quite strong, while the lamias knew so much about plant life that Nfir found himself relying on them as harvesters in the woods, and in turn he spent more time on life-saving potions. That festival certainly worked like a charm, didn't it? Peter asked as he strolled beside the chief speaker of the village. With his eyes forward, he barely noticed the dust that was kicked up by their walk toward the walls. "It really did," Henry acknowledged and watched as a runner woman and local Carnian chatted as if they'd known one another their whole lives. Bows in hand, they were lining up beside a goblin instructor, and from where Henry and Peter stood, they could both hear the pair call the goblin by name. "What's the population up to now?" We might actually need to do a census in order to work out who gets what land next," Peter suggested after the question. Henry didn't know quite how to answer, and she didn't have to. From a distant tower, a bell began to go off in earnest. She paled and her fist clenched. "Either our numbers are going to go up, or they're going to go way down. Come with me," she shouted, and took off at a dead sprint toward the wall. Her arms and legs pumped like they hadn't since the day her parents died. Her mind screamed for her to not do what she was doing now. "Go, find Nemu. Run. Run away and don't look back." Her bright eyes shimmered like sapphires as she feared the horror that lay ahead, but despite her urges, she ran toward the wall where 2 watchmen rang a large bell. The entire village was like an anthill that had been kicked over, but with nowhere to go but to fight and defend their homes and families, and dreading what would happen if they failed, peasants rushed to their positions. Henry reached the simple wooden ladder and scrambled up to the top. "What's going on?" she shouted, and the bell ringing stopped. The peasants pointed to a distant coming cloud. Henry squinted. It was difficult to tell just what she was seeing. "Peter?" she asked, her heart beginning to calm little by little. "Sorry, no, I can't tell," Peter answered. "Look, Root," Henry called, but she needn't have shouted. He was scrambling up the ladder only a few feet away. Lucroot shaded his eyes, then activated his martial art, Farsight, and what was making the cloud came clearly into view. "Relax. False alarm," he shouted. "It's a group of peasants. No weapons but farm implements, and it's mostly young children." The sigh of relief that went up in one body from the village gave way to laughter as the absurdity of their fears hit home. "They're just the next ones, you know that, don't you?" Nina asked, clutching her staff in her hands. Henry whirled around to find Nina standing there behind her, but not looking at Henry. Rather, she watched the dust people become visible as just people, and desperate ones at that. "I'll bet my staff they're on the line of march straight here." "Nina, you can't know that," Henry said, but doubt was thick in her voice. Nina answered without blinking or nodding. She only stared out at the coming little herd. "You've done a lot here, and with Moman, Nfea and Lord Ines all having made this place famous, people are searching for safety. When I was a little girl, and my big sister was taken away by a lecher, I prayed for a noble hero to come and save us. But the only nobles I've ever met were the ones who would do like the one who took her chose to do." Nina spat over the wall and into the dust, her knuckles white as she tightened her hold on the staff. Her entire body shook with outrage. "I saved one girl, one single girl, and damned who knows how many innocents died for it. How stupid. If I'd just let him take her, she'd be home crying right now, maybe. Or dead, or maybe worse, but it would only be one person." Nina ground her teeth and muttered her recriminations. Henry could think of nothing to say to that. She's not wrong, but isn't that what's wrong? Nina turned her attention to Henry again. "I'll go out and talk to them, and explain what they'll find in here and what's expected of them. Assuming we're not going to keep the gates closed?" No, we're definitely letting them in," Henry said, surprising herself with her certainty. "But talking to them first is good. Explain it all, then they can decide if they want in or not." "Fine," Nina said, and went down the ladder. The few guards at the gate lifted the heavy wooden barrier and the gate groaned open to allow her out, and the young magic caster went out to face the living consequences of her choice. Volume 2 Chapter 22. "Again," Sabos said with a voice as calm as a babbling brook and strong as any mountain. Arch approached with a steady stride out from her place of safety behind Cocytus. Beneath Sabos's boot lay a younger red dragon. An impossible foe for someone like her, but he had already beaten it to within an inch of its life. The fight was gone from the summon, it had not even the strength to roar. Unafraid, Arch put the tip of her staff to its eyeball. The yellow orb blinked at her once, and without hesitation she shouted the name of the spell. Lightning. With a wild crackle, the spell that would barely have scratched the monster minutes ago, ripped through its most vulnerable point and fried its brain. The body of the long red monster shivered and shook, and then Sabos lifted up his foot and placed it back into the sand. Arch grinned and looked up at her superior with bright and joyful eyes. "Another, Master Sabos?" Sabos very nearly said yes, but for catching sight of albedo out of the corner of his eye. "No. You've earned a rest, go spend time with your sisters." Arch bowed deeply over and over again, clutching her staff to her chest. Thank you, Sabos," she exclaimed and all but pranced out of the arena. As she left, Sabos approached the Guardian Overseer. Her sharp yellow eyes trailed after the shrinking human that vanished from the sands. Silence ruled until Arch was completely gone. "You are keeping something from me, Sabos." The butler of steel folded his hands behind his back and inclined his head. "I am." "You don't even deny it?" Albedo reared back and glowered. "I would not lie to my colleague," he answered, and somewhat mollified, Albedo pressed on. "What are you hiding from me? Is it something to do with the change to our master? Is it to do with the human pets he's acquired? I am the Guardian Overseer Sabos, I shall not be kept in the dark." "And yet you are, by Lord Ain's command alone." "I am kept silent. I believe he will reveal his reasons in due time, but for now I can reveal nothing, confirm nothing, and deny your request for answers." Sabos inclined his head. "I am truly sorry, Lady Albedo. But as I said, this is his will. At least tell me one thing." Asking as a woman. Albedo's yellow eyes quivered briefly, and Sabos said nothing. "Lord Ain's hasn't acquired those 3 human pets to breed with them, has he?" She shivered at the very thought, and this much, Sabos felt comfortable setting her at ease. "I believe his experiments are what they seem, Lady Albedo. To the best of my knowledge Lord Ain's is not a lolicon, nor is he interested in Arch as a potential mate." Sabos responded, and Albedo visibly relaxed. "That is answer enough, thank you, Sabos, for setting my heart at ease." Albedo spun on her heel and withdrew. Her stride was long and dignified as long as she had eyes on her, but as soon as she was out of sight, she began to prance. "Lord Ain's has a diak, Lord Ain's has a diak. Now I can have his baby. Ha ha. Thank goodness Sabos is soft-hearted and less intelligent than I. He could have told me my suspicions were true. Whatever he is, Lord Ain's can finally take my virginity." She clapped her hands together and snuck off to her master's room to peel off her clothing and wait for his return. For however long it took. Nabrul Gamma waited in the office of the human tick she was supposed to meet. Her raven black hair in her usual ponytail bounced while she tapped her foot. Her arms were crossed and, bored out of her mind, she looked around the office of her target. "I knew I should have just gone to his home instead. Stupid flea. It wasn't entirely fair to judge him for being late for an appointment that he didn't know existed." But Nabrul was in no mood to be fair to anyone, let alone a piece of trash human. His bookshelves were lined with dusty old tomes with letters she didn't recognize or care to learn unless she had to. The desk was a cluttered mess of papers in multiple stacks that left very little room to actually write on. Ink stains were over the fine wood, staining many areas a dark contrast to the naturally light tan surface. A single window admitted light, but various glowstones around the room suggested that the secret weapon of the Empire was something of a workaholic. Maybe catching the flea at home wouldn't have worked after all. She snorted and sat down in the old man's chair to wait. Though it might have been only 10 minutes, in truth to Nabrul Gamma it felt like an eternity before she heard the click in the lock and saw the door open a second later. An old man with a long white beard and a simple staff that looked more like a walking stick entered the office. He saw her only a hair after the moment she saw him, but the shock was his alone. "Who are you? What are you doing in my office? Get out. Get out this instant." Fluda shot at her. His entire body shook with rage at the insult of his desk and office being occupied by some nobody. "I've heard you want to look into the abyss of magic, gadfly." "Shut up, if that is true," Nabrul said and held up a hand. The mention of magic and the abyss were enough to still the shaking of the old man's rage-filled body and turn his wizened eyes from wrathful to focused. Nabrul touched the ring on her finger, and removed it. "Kwa-ah-ah." Fluda Paradine clutched at his chest. "7th. No. Is that the 8th tier? 8th? His knees began to wobble and it was only clinging to his staff that kept him from falling over entirely. The rush of power that he saw from the unassuming dark-haired beauty before him was unthinkable. And yet it was there. Nabrul slipped the ring back onto her finger, and it was gone. "My master is far more magically gifted than I, bagworm. Come with me, serve him, abandon this empire, everyone, and everything in it. And you might serve some purpose to the only god in this wretched world." Fluda did not know what just happened. All he felt was awe, confusion, and true optimism for the first time in many years. The mystery did not diminish when the whirling black void appeared in his room. But when the 8th tier caster stepped through it, there was nothing in the world that would have kept him from following, and nothing he would not do for the prize that lay beyond the other side. When he emerged, Fluda immediately asked himself, what was I expecting? Whatever it wasn't his former student, or two little ones who might have been younger versions of herself lying on the grass and holding books over their faces. Arch? Fluda asked, and the bright, promising student from before the fall of the House of Furt winked at him. Yes, teacher. Arch replied, welcome to your new home. The old caster stroked the long white beard that hung down his chin to the tip of his belt. I was told I might look into the abyss if I came here, have you? Arch ended the thought, no, teacher, but I have come closer. The god of this place. She stopped to sigh and looked around. Would you believe we're underground right now? Fluda frowned, but the sky? Not real, fly up and touch it. I've spoken with some of the beings who inhabit this place, even they don't fully understand how it happened, but they tell me that 41 gods once created this place. That this was their home, and that now there is only their leader, the one who stayed. Arch bowed her head when she uttered the reverential title. She then raised her head again. He looks after this paradise now, with the children of his friends, and I still don't know why me. But I was given a chance to serve him, a chance I didn't really deserve, but Lord Sabos selected me anyway. Now, here I am. Fluda did his best to absorb all that she said, then finally asked, what was I called for then? I suggested you, teacher. I traded everything for the lives of my sisters. I know, you consider that absurd, but it was worth it to me, and my loyalty is rewarded. You have another purpose, Arch said, and Fluda waited on pins and needles. Begin by acting as a teacher to my sisters, until the Supreme Being comes for you himself. When he does, offer him everything, Arch said emphatically and went over to him, taking his free hand in both of hers. You called me your favorite and most gifted student, then trust me now that I am telling you the truth. The one to bring you here. She watched the withdrawing back of Nobril Gamma, is only a maid. A battle maid, but a maid. Fluda furrowed his brow as he took everything in. Had he not seen the 8th tier off the woman, and passed through that curious hole in reality himself, he might have doubted his former student. As it was, however, everything happened. There was nothing left for him but to accept it as such. What am I to teach them? He finally asked, to which Arch answered. Arch's eyes fixed on Fluda with intensity that he only ever saw in his own eyes in a stray mirror when he spoke of magic. Teacher, their destiny is to serve the god who saved them from I don't even know what terrible fate. The one who stayed might ask anything of them, so there is only one thing to teach them. My student? Fluda pressed. Arch clapped her hands together. Everything, teacher. Everything. Rena sat in her quarters across from Prince Zaynak. What do you know about the events that took place in Kani? She asked, her face a mask of warmth that Zaynak knew to be false. Just what we heard at the feast, and what word was spread in the aftermath by the former adventurers. Why? The prince asked, leaning forward over his round belly. The tea he intended to drink, immediately forgotten. That's one of the many things I do not understand about anyone. Rena let out a martyred sigh. Nobody thinks further than an inch beyond their own noses. Sister? Prince Zaynak frowned deeply, lines of worry spread over his face. Brother dear, Princess Rena replied, let's play a little game. When I was very small, you used to play games with me. Now, I'd like to play one with you. He sat back, the frown lessening, but the hairs on his arms stood on end with wariness. All right. What sort of game? A game I made up. A little game I call What If. You play this game by postulating a scenario playing out in a particular fashion, and then work out what is most likely to happen given all the various interests involved. A simple way to think of it, a farmer raises crops, and then his lands are raided by a monster and destroyed, along with those of his whole village. Along comes a savior who destroys the monster, provides enough food for the season, and then is about to leave. What are the peasants there likely to do? Offer him a lordship to keep him there. Prince Zaynak replied, offer him anything if he'll keep them safe. There's a reason they say the first king was a lucky soldier, brother. That's exactly right. Rena clapped her hands together once and held her palms against one another. Now imagine some dreadful force destroys your home, but safety is only a few days of hard walking away, or you could go into the wilderness, or somewhere not known to be safe, Where do you go? Rena pressed, and took a sip of tea before folding her hands together. Steam rose from the cup and the warmth of the room spread out over her ruby lips. She kept her eyes keenly focused on her brother. His face suggested he was looking for a trap that didn't exist, and finally he slumped. To the safe zone, of course. He answered. Right again, it's the only logical course. Now suppose you live in that safe place, you fended off raiders, you saw undead dragons destroyed, you almost lost everything, you're terrified it may happen again, and there's nowhere to go, and a whole lot of new labor starts showing up asking to stay with you since you survived destruction while their home didn't. What do you do? Princess Rena leaned forward slightly, smarter of the two, still not the wisest out of us three. She thought, and waited. My home has a lot of labor and a fear of destruction. I prepare. Build walls, use the extra hands to make sure we have time to prepare to fight. It's basically what we struggle to do against the Empire every year. Though we mostly fail because of the nobles. The prince's round face flushed with anger and his fingers made a fist in his lap that he concealed from his sister. Well, what if our stupid older brother comes across that place, full of peasants, and he realizes his targets are there? What will our stupid older brother do? Rena put her elbow on the table and rested her chin in her palm. This was an easy question for Zaynak to answer. He'll attack. Not in person, because he is a coward, but he will send his soldiers to take the walls and destroy the place. His mouth fell open. Wait, Kani, you're talking about the place the Dark Hero rescued, and that Master Gown rescued. Very good, brother dear, very, very good. She praised him like he was a dog, but in that instant, Prince Zaynak didn't care. He began to see the direction she was going. Princess Rena's voice became almost hypnotic, her stare, serpent-like, and from it, Prince Zaynak could not turn away. Our stupid brother will attack. He holds peasants in contempt, but he forgets that everybody in that place will have been a survivor of at least one and probably more terrible calamities, and probably even some military veterans will be there too. They'll have nowhere to go, nothing to lose, and some of them at least will believe they can win. But our stupid brother will be used to just burning out and plundering places where nobody fought back. He won't understand the desire for revenge that lingers behind. That if you strike somebody in the morning, they'll remember it still that evening, and dream of striking back until they can kill you in the dark. Our brother will give them that chance, and he will probably be killed. So, what if our brother dies? More importantly, the crown prince, killed by our own peasants? Princess Rena pressed. The peasants will have nothing to lose, they'll rebel. The noble faction, they'll think the royal faction is weak, they might rebel too, will be surrounded on all sides. The annual war is coming up, the Empire will send at least 40,000 knights to deal with us, more if he thinks he can start gobbling territory up. It will be a free-for-all, the whole kingdom will burn. Prince Zaynak responded with mute horror. Exactly. You'd be the crown prince, but only the prince of a ruined kingdom. So, what do you do, brother dear? Princess Renu asked. Stop our stupid brother before he destroys us. Nip this rebellion in the bud before he can even spark it. Thank you, sister, I will get going right away. Prince Zaynak's face was pale as death before he even rose from his chair. His tea sat, forgotten and abandoned, on the little round intimate table he shared with his sibling. Then he rushed from the room. Alone again, Princess Rena stood up, went to her end table, and flipped open a book. There, a message scroll sat between the pages, waiting to be used. She removed it from its hiding spot and waited while the blue flames engulfed the floating scroll. Master Demiurge, it is done, she said, and there was no answer. She waited, but realized at last that his answer was silence. That's fine too, it doesn't matter. Only my climb matters. Only him, only him, only him, only him, only him. Only him.